Welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn, the Handspring webinar for manual therapists, manual practitioners, and movement practitioners and educators. Today, Wednesday, November 17, we welcome Joann Lutz, who has a Master's of Social Work. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker and a registered member of the International Association of Yoga Therapists as a certified yoga therapist. Joann is the author of Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone, a guide for mental health professionals and yoga therapists and teachers. Before introducing Joann, let's take a look at how things work. The webinar will comprise roughly 45 minutes of discussion, presentation, and guided practice, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Be prepared for some gentle, seated yoga practices. The chat is on, so please do say hello and tell us where you're joining from. We welcome your questions. Please submit these using the Q&A button on your screen. We aim to finish on the hour, but may continue for 10 minutes after the hour in order to ensure that we answer as many questions as we can. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share the link to it in the follow-up email to participants. This webinar is also streaming live on YouTube. And we draw your attention to our disclaimer that this discussion is for informational and illustrative purposes only and is not meant to impart medical or therapeutic advice or instruction. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Joann Lutz, who is the author of Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone, a guide for mental health professionals, yoga therapists, and teachers. Joann Lutz is the developer of nervous system informed, trauma-sensitive yoga. She has been training mental health professionals internationally for 9 years, offering a certification program in her approach. Joann was the initiator and co-chair of the 2007 National Conference, Integrating Yoga into Medical Health Care. An experienced psychotherapist and yoga therapist, she was the New England coordinator of the Spiritual Emergence Network and created the first East Coast in the USA continuing education courses exploring spirituality and social work. Joann, welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and to all of you who are attending. So I was thrown unaware into the world of therapeutic yoga 50 years ago when I was 21. At the time, some major life transitions had left me depressed and confused. Luckily, I found yoga at that time, and it helped me tremendously to stabilize my moods, create a healthy lifestyle, and tune more fully into my embodied experience. This left me wondering what it was about yoga that was so beneficial. I've been exploring the question ever since, while becoming a social worker, yoga instructor, psychotherapist, and finally a yoga therapist. Breakthroughs in the understanding of the physiological effect of trauma on the brain and body, and of the influence of having a dysregulated autonomic nervous system have paved the way for my current work of integrating Raja Yoga with trauma-sensitive yoga, polyvagal theory, and somatic psychotherapy. I call my approach nervous system informed trauma-sensitive yoga, or NITYA for short, which I describe in detail in my book. Right now, I'd like to give you a basic awareness and grounding experience as a way to promote the maximum regulation of your autonomic nervous system. So you can start by sitting up as straight as possible and noticing the points of contact between the back of your body and the chair or couch. And now you can shift your awareness to the flow of the breath, watching it as it flows in and flows out without trying to change it. As you breathe, you're joining your awareness with the physical process of breathing, which is one type of yoga, which means union in Sanskrit. You may notice a growing inward focus as you practice this, which is an indication that you're activating the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the rest and digest function. Please notice if you feel any different after doing this practice. On your next inhale, you can look around the room if you'd like, letting go of the focus on the breath. When you engage the environment with your eyes, you're directing your attention outward and upregulating the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, producing more energy and focus. You're also activating several of the cranial nerves, which contribute to your ability to socially engage, a state which balances the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. This balance influences our physiology, emotions, thoughts, and energy in positive ways. Their harmonious functioning is another form of yoga. So, when regulated, the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system gives us energy and focus, and the parasympathetic branch offers us healing and regeneration. According to polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, these responses rest on the healthy functioning of the vagus nerve. Later in this talk, I'll explain a bit about polyvagal theory and then present some yogic applications of it. But first, I want to tell you the story of two sisters, which is a metaphor for the functioning of the autonomic nervous system, of which polyvagal theory is a part. These young sisters were quite different, but they enjoyed playing with each other. The older one used to love to run through the woods, not knowing where she was going, for the exhilarating feeling. And the younger sister liked to sit on her bed and read and look out the window at the clouds going by. They were great companions because they balanced each other. The rambunctious child was grounded by her quiet sister, and the introspective one was energized and excited about life by her sister's exuberance. This story relates to a diagram that describes the healthy relationship between the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. It's called the window of tolerance and was developed by psychiatrist Daniel Siegel at UCLA back in the 1990s. This window is the area where the autonomic nervous system is regulated and the individual feels comfortable in their body and able to connect with themselves. And with the environment. The window is represented by the horizontal lines which divide the diagram approximately into thirds. In the window, you can see a curved line which represents the relationship between the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system through time. Its rise marks the upregulation of the sympathetic nervous system. As it falls, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes dominant. There's an oscillation between the two, which correlates with certain aspects of our physiology. For example, at the top of the inhale, the autonomic nervous system activation reaches its highest point. And at the bottom of the exhale, the parasympathetic tone is the greatest. So in the course of one breath, we can experience the entire range of our autonomic nervous system. In my work, I've renamed the window of tolerance the yoga zone to honor the powerful effect that yoga has on the autonomic nervous system. You may now more clearly see the analogy of the rambunctious sister, representing the sympathetic branch, and the meditative sister, representing the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. When they're alone, though, they sometimes don't do as well. In this next diagram, which is coming right up, the jagged line represents nervous system dysregulation, which negatively influences the various systems in the body. In her joy, the rambunctious sister can run through the woods without noticing what time it is, where she is, or that she's getting tired. She might end up lost in the middle of the woods at dusk. At that point, her nervous system may become dysregulated because of fear. And this dysregulation is described by the jagged black line extending above the window. In this state, the instinctual responses of her primitive brain take over, and she can't think clearly. She might run away or try to fight some invisible enemy. Eventually, she'd be exhausted, so her energy may crash, and she may end up in a depressed state, with her energy falling below the window of tolerance. She may be unable to think clearly. She may feel cold, lose energy, and eventually not be able to move. These are the dysregulated extremes. A similar thing can happen to the contemplative sister when relaxation becomes lethargy. There's a third, younger sister, who was often ill. She was sometimes hospitalized, where she was surrounded by medical professionals. Some of them were very kind, but many were just focused on numbers and medical tests and didn't pay much attention to her. And that was painful for her because she missed the opportunity to engage and, confined to a hospital bed, lost her ability to move freely. Because of this, she went into a depressed state, didn't eat much, or else she either couldn't sleep or slept too much. And again, that state is shown by the black line falling below the window of tolerance, or the yoga zone. While most kids can regain their enthusiasm for life after they recover, some develop a chronic autonomic nervous system dysregulation. In this state, the black line of dysregulation remains either below or above the window of tolerance for long periods of time. Psychiatric diagnoses, such as PTSD, and or chronic physical maladies can manifest when the nervous system is in this state. Fortunately, over time, this dysregulated state can be rebalanced naturally with the Eastern meditative movement disciplines, such as yoga, combined with other therapeutic support. When I began to compare current neuroscience research results on trauma healing with the techniques of yoga, I found tremendous correspondences. They seemed to be too similar to be accidental. My guess is that over the centuries, the yogis who developed this discipline must have been very aware of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system and how to regain regulation. I'd like to describe some of them to you, starting with a brief overview of polyvagal theory. It is, of course, based on the functioning of the vagus nerve, which is the longest of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves, all originating in the brainstem, and controlling the functioning of the head and neck, as well as the sense organs contained there. The vagus nerve is the communication system for the parasympathetic nervous system, relaying information from the body to the brain and from the brain to the body. It's also the only cranial nerve which descends below the neck, and therefore also regulates the functions of other major organs, including the heart and lungs and the digestive system. In his original work, Dr. Porges described two branches of the vagus with different functions. They are the ventral vagus, which originates in the front of the brainstem, because ventral relates to the front. And you may be able to see that on the slide. The ventral vagus works with other cranial nerves to regulate the movement of the eyes, the relaxation of the facial muscles, the relaxation of the tongue and the jaw, the acuity of hearing, the movement of the head, the sound of the voice, the rhythm of the heartbeat, and other important functions. You can see that it's tremendous range. That's why it's so important. In addition to enhancing health and self-expression, these functions signal to others the degree of regulation or safety present in the nervous system of those whom they're relating to. And this sensing enables successful social relationships. So I'd like to have us together experience the path of the ventral vagus nerve for a moment. We can trace the connections of the vagus with the facial muscles, the tongue, the jaw, the muscles around the eyes, the muscles that move the head and the eyes, the connection to the inner ear, and tracing down the neck, connections to the sound of the voice, and then the heart and the lungs. And by touching these areas, you can actually start to activate them. If you're familiar with the yogic deep relaxation, as well as some forms of yoga nidra, the yogic sleep, you'll recognize that the path of the vagus is also traced in these experiences. The other branch of the vagus nerve, the dorsal vagus, is responsible for physiological processes below the diaphragm, particularly digestion. When it's dysregulated, digestive disturbances, as well as dysthymia, depression, and at an extreme, catatonia may manifest. Safety is the key word in polyvagal theory, because the main function of the autonomic nervous system is survival. We have built-in instinctual survival patterns that have guided human beings for thousands of years. They're important, but difficult to change when they're not useful anymore, particularly with a cognitive approach. Yoga-based interventions enhance body and breath awareness, which are the most powerful tools I am aware of to re-educate this part of the brain. I'd like to focus now on introducing specific exercises and postures from the yoga tradition, which work with the ventral and dorsal vagus, which you can use in sessions with clients, as well as for your own regulation. And I'll lead you through some of them. If your client is open to it, I suggest starting with some kind of chair warm-up to help them to regulate their autonomic nervous system and start their therapy session from a more centered place. That involves slowly moving different parts of the body and rotating the joints. Working with the muscles in this way activates and then relaxes the autonomic nervous system. There's a script for this warm-up in my book. I'm sorry that we don't have time to go through it right now. The next possible focus in a yoga-informed session is the eye movements, which were a significant part of the yoga class, which I practiced and taught for many years. We can practice them now as a trauma-informed screen break. So you can start by taking a breath. We're going to be doing the vertical eye movements, keeping your head still and moving only the eyes. You can bring your gaze up toward the ceiling. Taking a breath, as you exhale, you can bring the gaze down through the center of your vision toward the floor, looking at the floor. Continuing that on your own now, once or twice. Inhaling and looking up. Exhaling and looking down, making smooth movements. And when your eyes reach center again, you can close them for a moment and notice the breath. Coordinating the breath with the movements is a very powerful kind of yoga. Again, the union of awareness and movement. So we'll do the horizontal movements now. So you can look to the far right-hand corner of your vision, making slow, smooth, steady movements of your eyes. Bringing the eyes across the center of your vision to the far left. Continuing on your own for a few sweeps. Noticing the breath. And then bringing the eyes back to center. We'll be doing the full circles now in a clockwise direction. You can imagine that the face of your clock, that the circumference of your eye is the face of a clock, and you're going to try to touch every point on the circumference. So you can start by looking up to 12 o'clock, and then 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and so on, sweeping all the way around the circumference of the eye, going at a pace that's comfortable for you. And when you reach 12, you can take one more sweeping full circle. And when that is finished, you can close the eyes for a moment. Take a breath. Taking the breath regulates the autonomic nervous system. And to complete the eye movements, we'll do full circles in a counterclockwise direction. So you can look up to 12, around to 11, 10, 9, 8, and all the way around. When you reach 12, you can take one more full circle at your own pace, making sure that it's comfortable for you. When you're finished, if you'd like to relax the eyes a little bit more, you can rub the palms of the hands briskly together till you feel a heat. And then you can cup the palms over the eyes with the fingertips in the hairline, feeling the heat penetrate the eyes. And then bring the hands down. These exercises are beneficial for toning and exercising the eye muscles, the vagus, and the other cranial nerves, which connect the eyes to the brain. Because of the cranial nerve connections to the eyes, the position of the eyes also helps to relax muscles in the neck and align the vertebrae there. This, in turn, influences the blood flow to the brain and can affect the state of the autonomic nervous system. And this important information comes from the work of Stanley Rosenberg, who's a body worker who studied extensively with Dr. Porges, the developer of polyvagal theory. Now I'd like to offer you some yoga poses, which can help your clients to become more regulated. They're particularly valuable in the moment that you recognize that the client is becoming dysregulated in the session. At that moment, if the client is willing, you can gently interrupt their story or process and teach a deep breath, a 3-part deep breath, a targeted yoga pose, or even part of a pose. The goal is simply to offer just enough yoga to nudge the client's autonomic nervous system back into regulation. And at that point, they can continue whatever type of therapy they're working on with you. In these poses, I'm using seated poses because they fit most easily into the traditional therapy session. And among the many benefits of yoga, in this presentation, I'm emphasizing only those that relate to autonomic nervous system regulation. Please sit in a comfortable chair or couch where your back can be straight and your feet can touch the floor. We'll start by imagining that you're experiencing some depression and are going into a dorsal vagus shutdown mode, also called tonic immobility, or in some systems, the freeze response. In that state, you may feel depleted and unmotivated. Depending on how out of touch with your sensations you are, you could start with a simple warm-up or a more complex one. The simple warm-up is to just stroke your own hand with the other hand or arm and notice the sensations or emotions which that evokes. course, with the more complex warm-up, you can rotate the shoulders, rotate the wrists and the elbows, and the head and neck. So after you've completed a warm-up, if you can focus sufficiently to do a seated cobra pose, you can sit up straight, bring your hands onto your thighs for stability, and slowly arch the spine at a pace which is comfortable for you. You may feel the shoulder blades coming closer together toward the center of the back. Notice that the chin and head may rise an inch or two. You're welcome to hold the pose now for as long as is comfortable, and either watch the breath, become aware of your body sensations, or both. You may be able to breathe more deeply in this pose due to the expansion of the rib cage. The deeper breath has a greater regulating effect on the vagus, and the compression of the spine brings fresh blood and energy to that area, squeezing out toxins, which can contribute to a depleted feeling. Take a few breaths in that pose as you are able. You can also come out of it whenever you need to. Now, I mentioned to get into the pose if you're able, because someone who's very dysregulated, who's in a deeper dissociative state or an immobilization state, would have difficulty doing this posture. And it's best for them to just stay with the very simple movement of touching their own hand or their own arm. There's a lot of techniques that work for the dysregulated person as well. And so the progression to a regular yoga pose would be maybe a slow one with a gradual re-regulation of the nervous system. Coming out of the pose now, please let your breath return to normal. You can take a moment to look around the room, letting your eyes go where they want to go, which is another regulating exercise. Please note the effect that the pose had on you. We're shifting now to a pose that addresses the opposite state of nervous system dysregulation, a sympathetic nervous system over-arousal, which can create a feeling of restlessness and tension. This state calls for a forward-bending pose because of its emphasis on a surrender to gravity and a release of muscular tension. And I want to mention that in this system, almost any backward bending pose or any forward bending pose that is agreeable to the client or the student works just as well to regulate the autonomic nervous system. I'm not suggesting that there's only one sequence and one pose that can do that. So this gives the therapist and the client a lot of flexibility to create interventions that really work for them. This sympathetic nervous system over-arousal can create a feeling of restlessness and tension. So we're going to be doing a forward bending pose. To begin this process, please place your hands on your lap or your knees. Move at your own pace and do as much as you feel comfortable doing, meeting your own nervous system at its current energy level. Please sit up as straight as possible and inhale. As you exhale, keeping the head in line with the spine, you can bring the torso halfway down toward the thighs and hold it there. If you have high blood pressure, heart disease, or head or neck injuries, you might want to stay right there. Otherwise, you can continue to bring the torso down as close to the legs as you'd like. And finally, you can let the head hang if you want to. And if you do this, please notice what it's like in your body for you to release tension. And enjoy this full forward bend. Please hold the pose for as long as is comfortable, remembering to breathe. And after your next inhalation, you can bring your head into alignment with the spine and very slowly come back to a seated position. You can now pause, take a breath or two, and look around the room. Teaching the posture while offering the participant many options offers the client an experience of sensing his or her body's limits, her boundaries, and also an experience of self-pacing, which is a form of self-care. So again, you can ask yourself if this experience had any noticeable effect on your experience of your body. Side stretching and twisting poses are also beneficial for vagus nerve regulation. Side stretches create space in the rib cage, allowing a person to take a deeper inhalation than they usually do. That this can create more parasympathetic tone and allow for more balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches for the anxious client. The seated half moon pose is an example. And I think we're going to have a picture of it on the screen. If you want to experience it, you can sit up straight, raise your left arm straight up in the air, and as you exhale, you can bend your torso to the right and arc your left arm overhead. Can you feel a stretch in your left side? Notice if you can breathe more deeply in this pose. And if you can, what effect does that have on your muscle tension, on the quality of your thoughts? Take a few breaths. You might want to take a little extra stretch and then let it go, bringing the arm down and straightening the torso. For the sake of balance, I'll instruct the same pose on the other side. On an inhale, you can raise your right arm straight up in the air. And on the exhale, you can bend your torso toward the left, arcing the right arm overhead and taking a few breaths, feeling the stretch on the right side of your body. As you exhale, you can release the pose, straighten the body, and lower the arm. Feel free to look around the room and notice any changes in your embodied experience. I'm now going to instruct the half spinal twist in a chair. If you want to join in, you can sit up straight with your legs together, feet on the floor. If they don't reach the floor, you could use a pillow or other prop underneath your feet. To assume the pose, please exhale. And as you inhale, slowly twist toward the left sequentially from the waist up through the rib cage, chest, neck, and head. And finally, gaze to the left so that you're looking toward the wall behind you. Taking your right hand, you can clasp the outside of the left thigh and hold on to whatever you're sitting on with your left hand in order to stabilize yourself. Notice the flow of your breath. Feel the twist in your spine, the connection between your body and the chair, and your feet and the floor. On your next exhale, if you'd like, you can twist around a little bit farther. And then on the inhale, you can release the pose, bringing the torso, arms, and legs back to center. Please shake them out and look around the room for a moment. We'll do the same thing on the other side. You can sit up straight and inhale. And as you exhale, slowly and sequentially twist to the right, from the waist through the chest, neck, head, and gaze. Grasping the outside of your left thigh with your hand, you can hold on wherever you can with your right hand. The right thigh with your left hand. You can hold on wherever you can with your right hand and hold the pose. Please focus on the breath, noticing what parts of your body expand as you inhale and what parts contract as you exhale. Take a couple of more breaths, and on the next exhale, you can release the pose and come back to center. Taking a breath, you can look around the room, letting your eyes go where they want to go. The half spinal twist encourages a deeper exhale, allowing additional compression of the ventral vagus nerve, and therefore the potential for increased parasympathetic tone. This movement may also upregulate the dorsal vagus to help the individual raise their parasympathetic tone. As you choose the shape of the pose and focus on the body sensations and the breath, you're consciously sending messages to your brainstem, which is where the autonomic nervous system and the vagus nerve originate, that you'd like it to either become more energized or more relaxed. This is a powerful message sent to the part of the body that's difficult to influence because it's responsible for our survival, and the physiological processes it governs are mostly subconscious. For example, we can't easily control the speed of our heart or the amount of secretion of hormones from our glands. The genius of yoga is that it trains us to focus on what we can consciously change. So I've identified 4 dimensions of a yoga pose to be aware of when you're selecting the best pose for a client in a particular moment. The first dimension is simply your intention based on the state of the client's nervous system. The next most important factor in choosing a pose is its shape, as I've noted in the poses I just instructed. For review, the backward bending poses require some conscious focus and muscular strength to hold the pose in a certain position. Often, you're going against the gravitational pull, which requires energy. All of these factors raise sympathetic tone. The forward bending poses offer a release into gravity. In this release, the parasympathetic nervous system response is strengthened because forward bending poses don't require any effort or focus, and they relax the muscles. So there are just two more factors to consider when crafting an intervention in this Nitya style. One of them is the pace in which the pose is taught, because a faster pace would increase sympathetic activity and a slower pace would help to increase parasympathetic tone. And then there's the variable of effort, which is the amount of force that a client uses to get into a certain pose. If the effort is strong and direct, then the energy expenditure could raise sympathetic tone, even if it's a forward bending pose. So ultimately, the effect depends on how the pose is done. I'm moving on to a brief exploration of the breathing practices, which can be even more powerful autonomic nervous system regulators than the poses. For the breathing practices, the factors to consider are intention, depth, pace, effort, and nostril choice. And I have a lot more to say about these factors in the book. I don't have time right now in this presentation to go into them, unfortunately. But I would like to guide you through the basic breathing practice that underlies most of the other ones, which is the yogic 3-part deep breath. So you're welcome to start it by noticing the natural flow of your breath, watching it as it flows in and flows out. There are many benefits to simply observing the flow, which is easier for some people than doing the breathing practices because there's no performance anxiety involved. Other individuals do better with a specific breathing practice, which gives their mind more focus. For the 3-part deep breath, you're welcome to do as much of this breath as is comfortable for you. If you should feel dizzy or lightheaded, please know that this feeling isn't dangerous, but you are advised to stop the practice. So please sit up as straight as possible with your head in line with the spine, shoulders relaxed. Exhale, and on your next inhalation, fill the abdomen with air. Imagine that a balloon filled with helium is inflating that area. You can place your hands on your abdomen to feel the movement. This is the first part of the 3-part deep breath. After your next exhalation, you can bring your hands to your rib cage, inhaling and feeling the ribs expanding out to the side. This is the second part. Again, you can visualize a balloon inflating to fill the rib cage. So you can inhale abdomen and ribs and exhale ribs and abdomen in the opposite order. And now you can move your awareness up to your chest. We're going to be doing the third part of the 3-part deep breath. Breathing into the chest, feeling the collarbones rise slightly. So you can inhale abdomen, rib cage, and chest with your hands on your collarbones. Again, using the image of a balloon rising to that area if you'd like. Feeling the movement. And at the top of the inhale, you can begin to exhale, chest, ribs, and abdomen in the opposite order of the inhalation. Finally, feel free to put aside the concept of the 3 parts and experience the deep breath as a smooth, integrated experience. So this practice may seem very simple and straightforward, but it is very difficult for some individuals to breathe deeply if they're not used to doing it. I remember when I started practicing yoga, it took me a few months to feel really comfortable with the breathing practices because of emotions that were had been pushed down into my abdominal organ that I then started to feel. So the breathing practices are powerful in that way too. So we're coming to the end of the program now. And I want to give a little summary. The brainstem, where the vagus nerve originates, has instinctual and learned patterns that keep us alive. This part of the brain that safeguards our survival is not going to give up its patterns very easily. So it can be difficult to change them. Yoga and other Eastern movement disciplines, however, show a way. Some of the most powerful ways to influence this primitive brain are through being aware of our internal experience, of the body sensations, and of the breathing patterns, and slowly, skillfully using them to regulate our physiology. To accomplish this, we can start practicing postures and breathing patterns that will influence our autonomic nervous system. Raja Yoga is a system that, when sensitively used, can balance and regulate the autonomic nervous system over time, offering a person a peaceful mind and a healthy body. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I have an e-newsletter, which I would love to email to you. If you send me your email address to my email address, joannlutz22@gmail.com, with a little note to be added to my newsletter list, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you so much for attending.
Joann, thank you very much for this rich and informative and transformative experience. Before launching into the questions, let's take a look at the slide that shows the participants how they can contact you and how they can access your book. So your website, yogainpsychotherapy.com, is at the top of the screen, and your email, Joann Lutz 22 at gmail.com. I'm sorry, Joann Lutz 22@gmail.com. And we encourage you to take advantage of this discount code that Handspring offers, a 20% discount on trauma healing in the yoga zone. This code will expire December 31st, so purchase your holiday presents now. We'll also bring your attention to that our next webinar, our next Move to Learn session, will be Wednesday, December 15. Our guest is Ellen Horowitz, who's the author of Yoga Therapy and Art Therapy Interventions for Mental Health. Here is the gorgeous cover of her book next to Joann's book. You can register for the webinar at the handspringpublishing.com Move to Learn website. Hillary, thank you for that slide. Joann, I'll start in with a question that I have. Given your clinical experience, what differences do you note with clients of different age groups, clients of different ages, integrating your nervous system trauma-informed yoga? How, for example, would you work differently with a client who's a teenager versus a client who is in their older years?
Well, most of my experience has been with adults. And I think it's age is not the major classification that I would look at. It's the condition of the person's body and their connection, the degree of connection to it. So that is what the information that I would need to create the best program for someone and to be with them moment by moment when we're implementing it together. But so if you'd like to say why that's important to you, I'd be happy to entertain that question more fully. But
the reason that it came to mind is that I'm aware of and I've read a number of articles that indicate that there's been that the pandemic has been particularly difficult for the mental health of children, of teenagers, of adolescents.
mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering how your approach to yoga therapy and integrating this information would be beneficial.
Well, again, it depends on whether their autonomic nervous system is, if the sympathetic branch is too stimulated or the parasympathetic branch, there would be an entirely different approach based on what the actual nervous system state is.
Yes. In your book, you have an assessment tool. Would you speak about how you use the assessment tool in determining what's the best approach for your clients?
Sure. Well, there's certain elements that I would want to look at and have a clear grasp of. First of all, is the client open to a embodied approach? Some people aren't, in which case I feel that it's not the right approach for that person. And then I'd want to find out about their medical history, to know their body better, and to observe them, observe the degree of muscle tension in the face, the muscle tension around the eyes, the sound of their voice, their breathing pattern. That gives me a tremendous amount of information in order to determine which kind of dysregulation they might have and what type of sequence to create for them. And then I have a section in it to actually enumerate which interventions might be best for that person. So take it from the general down to the specific in terms of treatment planning.
What recommendations do you make for an independent home practice to augment the in-person or the Zoom therapy sessions?
Yeah, well, that's a very important component of this work, because for me, the eventual goal is to teach the client to be able to practice on their own. And not only that, but to be aware of the signs of nervous system dysregulation, so that if they notice their breath becoming shallow or their face muscles becoming tight or being unable to sleep, there's many different possibilities, then that recognition would guide them to which they would already know which kind of interventions they need to practice. So my general goal is to have them internalize what we did in the sessions over a period of time, and then be able to go out and be their own yoga therapist. It could be as simple as in the middle of a phone call or waiting for a bus, just realizing they're tense and taking a deep breath, or noticing that they're keyed up, they're waiting for a doctor's appointment or something, so that they know that if they, do a twist to the right and a twist to the left, which is very inobtrusive, they can do that in the doctor's office, that it will help to re-regulate their nervous system, bringing their attention back into the present moment and calming them. It's a moment by moment practice, both in the therapy session and out of the therapy session.
The integration of nervous system informed trauma sensitive yoga, from your perspective, and the psychotherapy field is a vast and very dynamic system. Flow or trend of integrating psychotherapy with yoga informed practices. From your perspective, both as an individual practitioner and also a participant in a number of conferences, would you speak about the trends that you see in how maybe traditional or conventional psychotherapy is now integrating with yoga-informed practices?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different, that's a vast question also, but on the practitioner level, I find more and more psychotherapists have either had healing experiences with yoga on their own, and that's why they're interested in this work, or they are yoga teachers themselves, or even yoga therapists. There's a lot of dual professionals. And so that's very exciting to me, more and more. But on the, on the national level, on the level of the different professional associations, there seems to be some reluctance or, hesitation to approve like continuing education courses for mental health professionals that include yoga. It's the climate has changed and it's becoming more restrictive. So, I don't have a pulse on exactly what's happening. It's probably different in different parts of the country. I know that you're in California, and I imagine that it's maybe more commonplace in California to have an integration of spiritual practices and psychotherapy than it is in other parts of the country. So also, I get a lot of questions from therapists about whether they can bill for a session where they included yoga, or whether it's legitimate, for them to be doing it. And so that's where training comes in. If a therapist has specific training that is approved by their professional organization, then they can say that it's within their scope of practice to bring it into their work. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I've looked at it from a few different angles.
Yes, that's so valuable. And it will also be valuable for today's participants and also those who watch this recording in the future on the Handspring YouTube channel, so that they can follow up in their area for the continuing education practices, continuing education courses that will help their practice evolve and be more beneficial for their clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Please, would you tell us again how people can get in touch with you if they would like to study with you or be in communication?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a wonderful newsletter that I send out electronically every month, and it lists everything that I'm doing, all my public appearances. So I'd be happy to include anyone on that list. If you send me an email, and feel free to email me for any reason relating to my work. It's my name, Joann Lutz 22 @gmail.com. Now, So my website, I'm actually in the process of revising it right now. So it's actually not up right now, and I'm really sorry about that. Within a week, it will. I expect it'll be brand new and shining, and that would be another place to go to read about my trainings. I do have a certification program where I work with people one-on-one in supervision sessions after they've taken some basic training. So those are some options. Yeah.
Wonderful. Joann, thank you so much for this generous offering. And I'll look forward to staying in touch to support your vision and your book and your work. And we'll also look forward to gathering next month for the Handspring webinar for Hand and Heart with Ellen Horowitz. Thank you all. Be well. Bye-bye.